Military law or civilian law? Is there a difference? We've got a retired lieutenant colonel from the U.S. Air Force Reserves here to shed some light. You'll meet him coming up next on Carolina People. Good morning. Welcome to Carolina People. This morning we're at the Myrtle Beach Herald. We're focused on the United States Air Force Reserves. And we're visiting with Lieutenant Colonel, retired Richard L. Foltz. Good morning.
Good morning. Morning.
Thanks so much for being with us this morning.
Pleasure to be here.
And that word retired has been a pretty recent thing.
Last July, I put my papers in. It took about 6 months to process, but I got my certificate and my flag. I was awarded a flag that flew over the Capitol.
Wow. That's over the U.S. Capitol.
Yes, yes.
What's that like?
It's really a keepsake. We haven't really figured out what to do with it yet. My wife wants to get one of those triangular boxes, shadow box, that are made for folding American flags.
Oh, yeah.
Put it up.
That's a great idea.
Yes.
You put that in the living room or put it, of course, that would be a great thing down the road for surely a keepsake for the whole family.
Yes, yeah, it really would. It's not that often that a family might have something like that, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. This was 25 years in the reserve.
25 years total service.
Okay, right.
Out of that, I had just under 5 years of active duty.
Okay, so 2 decades of reserve duty, and golly, 25. It was 1979 was the year.
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with the way that the military counts points, but I actually went active duty very early in January of 1980, shortly after I was admitted to the bar.
Right.
And you count the years based upon how many times you pass what they call a retirement retention day, which is my date of commissioning, which was May 22nd. Mm-hmm. So it really depends upon how you count the days. Mm-hmm. It's almost as though they have a different set of fingers and toes than we do, but it comes out to 25 years.
Mm-hmm. Now, are you regularly hear Lieutenant Colonel? Are you used to only hearing that when you were active on the reserves or actually traveling down, or do you hear folks here in town call you Lieutenant Colonel?
No, not very often at all, no. Occasionally I'll have clients come in and say, "Hey, Colonel, how you doing?" or something like that.
Right, yeah, I like that. I'm going to call you Colonel. I like that. Colonel, what was it like early on when you think back to the early on in life? Had you always thought that you wanted to be in the military?
I probably never thought about it early on. When I was in high school, of course, at that point we were drawing towards the end of the Vietnam War.
Right.
I wanted to go into the service. I had thoughts like many of us did of that generation. Did you want to go draft, or how do you want to go in if you're going to have to go in? My brother had gone into the Navy after his number had come up on the draft, right, 2 years before me. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to go into the Air Force. I chose the Air Force and I wanted to fly. And so that was what my sights were set on, and that's what took me in that direction.
And that set the stage for matriculating to the Citadel.
Yes, it really did. I was accepted to a number of schools, and that was the only one that really grabbed a hold of me.
Had you applied to any other military-based institutions or any other BMI or...
Well, I had applied for an appointment to the United States Air Force Academy.
Okay, right.
And there's quite a long elimination process in this whole thing, and I was accepted into their, like an intermediary school, and I didn't want to do that. And so, but I didn't get an appointment, I guess I should say. And so the Citadel was there, and I'm not sure that by the time that came down, I wasn't relieved that I wasn't going to the Air Force Academy, because the more I knew about the Citadel, and when I first applied, I knew very little about it. Mm-hmm. I liked what I was finding out, and so I really preferred going there.
Share with viewers what it was about the Citadel that you thought at that age, at 17 and 18, that this was going to be the right place to be, and then what it was when you got there that made it the right place to be.
Well, it's a very disciplined environment. A student that wants to have the opportunity to study, that wants to have the opportunity to grow within a disciplined environment, you know it's going to be there, that you don't have the side distractions that many schools have.
Right.
And I had many friends from years before me that were going to other schools that were distracted out of studies.
Sure.
Getting down there it's a shock. As a freshman at a Citadel, you're called a knob when you first show up, because the knob haircut is one where they closely, not shaved, but it's buzzed.
Virtually shave it all off.
Yes,
yeah.
yes, and so you get called knobs. Other kinds of schools like the Citadel call you something similar to that. You have rats and VMI and beasts, I think they're called at West Point.
Now, what's a plebe?
A plebe is just the same thing. It's just a term, a derogatory term referring to low life. Yes, the first year. And you have to remember, with the Citadel or any military school, there are many different structures. You have a rank structure. You also have a class structure that the freshmen are going to be different than sophomores and different from juniors just by virtue of the class rank that you have.
Right.
That's regardless of the corps of cadets. And then within your own class, you're all really the same regardless of what kind of rank you have within the corps.
Of course, you know, one of the more exciting things now is the aspect of your son being down there, Colonel, and the excitement of hearing all about it again and recreating much of the early 70s for you.
Yes, yes. He's had certainly a more stellar career than I did, I'll say. He's going to be graduating, we think, top in his class in about 4 weeks.
Oh, come on.
And as an alumnus, I'm entitled to be on the stage and to physically give him his diploma.
Is that right?
Yes.
You said top of his class?
Top of his class.
You mean really top of the class?
4.0. The first honor graduate, they call it.
That is fantastic. How exhilarating, as not only as an alum, but as your son. Of course, for you and Arlene to go through that, the excitement to recognize this is y'all's only child?
Yes, yes. We're very proud of him.
Golly, that must be wonderful. And of course, even more exciting, it seems like y'all that he's been having some exciting adventures recently, preparing for his postgraduate work.
Yes, yeah, he really has. He's, of course, he's decided to go on to graduate school, and he was thinking about a master's degree for a long time. We were thinking about him going to law school for a long time as well. But he's studying civil engineering, and he wants to study structures further. And the schools that he applied to, and I'm including MIT and University of Virginia, Virginia Tech and University of Illinois.
Right.
These schools all got into a bidding war almost with him on how much they could offer him.
Oh, God.
And then along came a Department of Defense sponsored fellowship. It's a Defense Engineering Fellowship, and I'm not sure of the exact term, but it's in conjunction with an American Civil Engineering Society. And they have offered him a fellowship for a full 3 years.
Is that right?
So he's chosen the University of Illinois to start in the fall.
He's going to be heading to the University of Illinois. For some reason, I had in my mind that he was heading to MIT. So,
well, he visited MIT, and for the structures program, he felt that Illinois was better suited.
That is fantastic. Golly, except that he's going to be just that much further away from y'all.
Yes, yes. Well, we'll have to travel a little bit.
Get in the car.
Our little boy's grown up, and so
I know.
Yeah, we haven't seen him very much anyway, even as it is down at the Citadel, as close as that is.
You know, when you think about those experiences at the Citadel early on, is there always an obligation for the folks attending that they will later head into the military at some level or another?
No, I don't believe that there's been a high percentage since about the time, well, maybe during the heyday of Vietnam, but even when I was graduating, only about a third took commissions.
Is that right?
And that seems to be about the same level that it's following right now.
So for a parent, let's say for your folks, Colonel, as you were thinking about that early service, I mean, thinking about heading down there, when you hear that idea of discipline, even at 17 and 18, you hear that. I know you said you had some classmates or knew others that had headed out to school and had the pure lack of discipline, but was that truly something that you were interested in, and even surely something your parents be interested in?
Yes, actually. I was always interested in the military anyway, so that gave me another incentive on this whole deal. And for myself, I was headed towards seeking a commission.
Right.
And I wanted to have that structure. The Citadel is an ROTC-based commissioning source, as opposed to the academies.
Right.
And so, but on top of that, it was a military school. Now, even non-commission oriented people like our son, they have to take ROTC. But he's never had any indication or any desire to go into the military.
You did go immediately after college after the Citadel to law school.
Yes. I was commissioned upon graduation. That was that May 22nd that I had mentioned before. And that was my day of graduation. They took all of us into the chapel there on campus, and this is all the services for the commissioning. And we were all sworn in together. And so we became second lieutenants at that point, and I took a program that was called educational delay. By that time, my eyes had degraded enough that I could no longer be a pilot, and there was a wind down from the end of the Vietnam War, and it was about 18 months to wait to get in the navigator school to sit around and do nothing. And so I had to kind of make a decision, so I opted to go ahead with the educational delay and go to law school now and go that way.
So you've been practicing now, of course, you said 79 is when you finished law school?
Yes, sir. That's when I was admitted to the bar, November of 79.
Right, at 25 years now, just a few months ago, 25 years.
Yes, yes.
Golly. Yeah. Think about that, those 25 years over that period of time. And, of course, early on, the service there in the military, in the Air Force, was that when you think about that, is it a JAG, is it a Judge Advocate General when you actually finished law school, and then were you practicing law then in the military?
Yes, yeah. The JAG program, the military lawyers do essentially what other lawyers will do, except that your client is the United States Air Force. And I'm not saying that the issues are the same, but you have a certain clientele, and you can be a lawyer for a large corporation, and your focus will be a little bit different than if you're a real estate lawyer in private practice. In the military, the focus is much, much greater than just courts martial and things like this that you hear about. And that's a very small part of your practice. The command has a great deal of legal issue, whether they be environmental issues, how do you use your base, what's happening on the base. Back in the 70s with protesters, you had certain legal issues that you had to advise the commander just on, what can they do to keep people off the base?
Right.
How do you maintain order? How do you maintain discipline? And it's not just the troops, it's within the community. Are they allowed to take law enforcement to help the civilian community work up a crime scene? And there are laws that deal with that. Contracting. I could go on and on and on and on. That there are legal issues and even specialties now that the Air Force in particular, and I say that only because I am more familiar with it.
Right.
The other services probably do it as well. But they will actually send judge advocates to postgraduate school for LLM degrees in certain specialties, such as environmental law, federal labor relations, federal contracting law, to get an LLM degree for further specialization.
And surely probably a lot of lawyers get involved when a base is shutting down. When you think about environmental issues.
Yes, yeah.
The issues that I'm surely impacted this base early. I mean, here in the morning, hearing the planes still flying over, obviously folks coming over from Shaw or otherwise, here in the morning, I'm sure you've heard that plane flying back and forth over. So you think about the issues here on the former Myrtle Beach Air Force Base.
Well, I was here then.
You were here then?
I was here then. I left active duty in 1984, but my first unit of attachment within the reserves, the reserve program that I was part of, I was attached to an active duty organization rather than reserve organizations. And so I actually served here. And in fact, in the last 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, I have to go back and think about it, I was the acting staff judge advocate for much of that last period of time before the base closed.
Is that right?
That I was activated to serve. And don't make that sound impressive. They were looking for somebody that you had to have a judge advocate here, and there wasn't anybody here because everybody had moved.
Had moved out, sure.
And the actual staff judge advocate was off looking for a house at his new base, and he came back to actually do the closure. But they needed a warm body to sit in the JAG office.
Well, there were probably attorneys that were brought in to help make sure the environmental issues were handled properly. I mean, when you think about, I know for a short while we had to lease this facility. At the time the Air Base Redevelopment Authority was set up, I had to lease this building prior to being able to purchase. So I was a sublessee, actually, and then even a little piece in the back that continues to be leased because of some environmental issues with the buildings close by. So I'm sure there were a lot of issues that came into play.
There were. A lot of them had to do with leasing type issues. Most of the environmental resolution area, that came post-closing. And so by then the military was out of it, and the civilians were coming in. So,
you know, when we think about the reserves right now, I was talking to somebody yesterday, Colonel, that thought that an important question when talking about the U.S. Air Force reserves now would be as it relates to so many folks in the Air National Guard as well as in the reserves being sent into active duty, being called back in because of the issues, whether it's the fight against terrorism or the issues in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that it was one of the highest levels of deployment, if not the highest in the history of the American military, of folks being called in and actually sent overseas.
Well, that's true. And within those units that get mobilized, and when I'm referring to the unit type reservists, where everybody within the unit is in the reserves, and the National Guard people, where everybody within that unit is a guardsman, they will have their own issues in mobilizing, and of course they would have their own legal staff within that for that unit. Where it came to play for those folks in my role is that sometimes they need some assistance in taking care of personal legal matters, drawing up wills, giving them some advice on what they need to do as far as closing down businesses, and things like this. There's a very limited depth that we can get into civilian matters, but that's where, as a reservist, a lot of times I had a leg up to the active duty folks that were trying to advise people. And
because you had the practical experience outside of it. Absolutely.
Exactly.
That'd be vital, and that must be a thrill for a lot of the active folks to bring in reservists because they have that practical side.
It was, and the program that I was in, most of the Air Force Reserve Judge Advocates are. I mentioned before that I was attached to an active duty organization, and the program, rather than being a unit reserve program, it's called Individual Mobilization Augmentee. That as an individual, I augment the active force, and I am attached to an organization. My last organization was with the Office of the Staff Judge Advocate of the 16th Special Operations Wing down at Hurlburt Field, Florida. And the folks with SAL, the Special Operations, they've been deployed all the time anyway, and very active. This goes back to when I started training with them back in '93, '94 time frame, and always gone to places that you can't talk about, long before the war on terrorism. And so they always have had an ongoing need for continuing help, and a lot of times it's just backfill too. You know, that if the active force is deploying, who's going to help run the base? And that's where the IMAs, like me, and it's not just JAGs. I mean, every specialty within the Air Force has an IMA, a mobilization augmentee force. Okay. The mechanics, the engineers, they all have IMAs. They're not as loaded as the JAGs are, because the JAGs emphasize the IMA program where the other ones emphasize the unit program. And but they all have an assimilated program like that. And they come in, one of the reasons is to come in and help that base continue to function while the active people are deploying, if that's what they're doing.
You know, it's fascinating when you think about the issues that oftentimes come up with JAG officers, the experience whether it's the practical side for the reservists where you're coming in to help folks on the issues as they're moving on, but also some of the issues that attorneys or JAG officer have to come up with as it relates to laws of war, and oftentimes making sure, even going over to combat zones after something is terminated, to make sure that laws of war were met properly or followed properly. There are a heck of a lot of issues that come into play.
Sure. As a matter of fact, they've come up with a name for it, and it's called operational law. And they first came up with that whole concept shortly after Desert Storm and Desert Shield, that with all the deployments that all the services were doing, that they needed something to attach to that. And it includes the law of armed conflict, the fiscal law requirements. What pot of money do you pay people out of? Mm-hmm. If you're going to build an airstrip, who pays for it, and how much can you do? And those are issues that in the newspapers many people very high ranked have lost their jobs over by spending the wrong pot of money. I mean, these are things that lawyers have to get involved in and be aware what can be done. Mm-hmm. You know, how do you meet up with the local townspeople to get work done? You know, who negotiates these things? There are a lot of issues that deal with just the mere fact of being deployed, and you've got some sort of a status of forces agreement or some sort of agreement with the host country. Just what are you allowed to do?
Right, right. Dick, how critical the aspect of reservists being able to come in and to help out some of the practical day-to-day activities that active JAG officers may not be thinking about. How important. And when you think about that, as you think about your own practice now, share with the viewers real quick what you've been doing over the last, I think you said you'd celebrated 20 years of your practice. Is it 84 to recently to 2004?
Yes. Well, when I left active duty, of course, I knew I was going to be staying in the reserves, and this is one of the things that I talked to my wife about on what we were going to do. And rather than joining a firm, I went solo. And so I'm the only lawyer in my office. I've been sharing office space with another lawyer for, oh gosh, since I think about 1985 we first got together, and except for a slight break, we've been together ever since then.
I didn't know that.
Just for a very long time. He had been with legal services or something, but it's an independent office. I am the lawyer, and my wife is my office manager and has been since the summer of 1985 as well. She had previously been a registered nurse and came to work with me, and I've got another secretary, and I'm almost exclusively real estate. I do a good bit of corporate work. Again, part of that is the decision I made many years ago. If I was going to stay in the reserves, what kind of practice can blend in with being gone, that it got to where some years I was gone 5 or 6, 7 weeks. And I couldn't really be trying to run a litigation practice if I never knew what my own schedule was going to be.
Your schedule would be like, sure.
And so we talked about it, and that was the kind of practice that we could sustain. And the worst would happen is my clients would go somewhere else if I was gone. But you know, their deal would still get closed.
Right. Critical practical issues that have to be thought through. How great that you've got your better half to be able to think those through with, who's not only with you as your better half, but also as your office manager.
We're together a lot, yes. It's, in fact, we carpool together almost every day, and so we, yes, she really, I think that personal interest in our firm, I should really say it really adds to a lot about it, because there's an interest in making sure that files don't stagnate, that you push to get things closed if that's what your clients want. So yeah, it's really good.
What was that like for you and Arlene when you figured out that your son was heading away from the idea of law school and instead thinking seriously about? Had you always contemplated that, or had he always thought maybe that's something that I'd want to do?
Well, when he went into engineering, at that time he was still talking as though he might want to go to law school, and all I could give him as far as my advice was that I thought engineering would be a wonderful background.
Oh yeah, sure.
The possibility, particularly when he started doing well, because he's had a 4.0 cumulative. I mean, it's not just a recent thing. With his engineering as well as he's done, we always kind of knew that was probably a direction he'd go, at least in his immediate graduate studies. Whether or not he'd ever go to law school, Yeah, perhaps. And he still may. We don't know. I mean,
That's right. That's right.
Because he's done well in other areas other than engineering down at Citadel as well. And so he's been involved in a lot of things. He was in an invitation-only English class last semester. So he's doing well across the board. And so he still may.
That's right. He still may. Dick, you're not going to believe it. We've run out of time. I wanted to share with viewers a little about the experiences as a mock trial coach. We'll have to get you back. The excitement, it was great hearing from one of the folks at the Herald that y'all had some involvement together, where your son and his daughter had been active in mock trial there in high school, and the experiences as a coach there and traveling around. But we'll have to get you back another time to share with viewers what that's like. Thanks so much for being with us this morning.
All right. Thank you.
Absolutely. Stay tuned to more Carolina People with Colonel Richard Foltz coming up next. Think about that military service and the discipline and the structure involved. We didn't get to talk to Dick about growing up in Charlotte, the third of 4 children. We did get to talk to him about the experiences of desiring structure, desiring discipline, wanting to be in a setting where he wouldn't stray off like some of his classmates or friends he knew, the experience of attending the Citadel. Next year it'll be 30 years since he graduated. The experience of recognizing, of course, his son and being down there on May 7th. The date's getting close. Think about he and Arlene traveling down there and Colonel Foltz being up on the stage while his son receives the graduation top in his class. You think back to those early days in life and reflect back how things have progressed and the excitement of the service in the United States Air Force actively, and then in the reserves for the last 20-some years. The experiences are very high. Life is good. Think about it as they celebrate on May 7th and for many years to come.